Please welcome Naomi Drummond-Leslie.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to share today with you. I'm grateful to be here today and to be sharing it with you, but I'm also struggling internally. Okay. Before I tell you of my struggle, let me tell you about who I am and where I've come from. I'm Naomi Drummond-Leslie, a direct descendant of the Black Loyalists and the granddaughter of the late greats Joseph and Verna Drummond. My father's family are direct descendants of the Black Loyalists by way of my great-great-grandmother, Delaney Peters. The Black Loyalists helped build the city that we know as St. John. They were also the enslaved persons from the USA who were promised freedom, land, and their rights if they fought for the British Empire here in Canada. The Black Loyalists upheld their end of the agreement. The British did as well, but there were stipulations. The freedom in the land was granted. The Black Loyalists were given land outside of St. John. This land was swampy, wet, and marshy. Basically, this land was unfarmable. And also, they weren't allowed to sell their goods within St. John City proper. My grandparents are Joe and Verna Drummond, or Mr. and Mrs. D as they were affectionately called. They raised 11 of their own children: Gary, Darcy, Armand, Darlena, Holly, Teresa, Aaron, Adrian, Angie, and Antwine, and they also shared wisdom and life lessons with countless other neighborhood kids. It was then in the 60s and into the 70s that my grandfather was being heard more as he stood for what was right for the blacks in New Brunswick. He was a fighter and an activist. He fought hard to get overseas when he was underage, and then he fought even harder to have the blacks in New Brunswick have employment. He regularly spent time at correction facilities to help educate his brothers. He was there reminding them that they came from greatness and they shall return to greatness. He sought help for and from all that he could. He ran politically both here in Fredericton and also locally in St. John. While doing this, he was alongside with his beautiful wife Verna. They began the Women's Auxiliary of the Black Community, or the WABC. The WABC put on events through the year to unite their community. There were dinners, dances, picnics, and teas. You knew the WABC was looking out for members of their community. They wanted to keep us all united. They kept track of all the Black high school graduates. They delivered meals to shut-ins. At Christmas time, they would sponsor families to ensure everyone spent Christmas with a meal in their belly and a gift under the tree. I grew up deeply immersed in a Black community. I attended the picnics and volunteered at the dinners and teas. I went to family dinners and different events out at Taylor Lake, where our family's land was given to us. I had a league of Black women and men to look up to. I was surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins, never knowing who was blood or not. Growing up as a Drummond, with a Leslie side, it meant that I was recognized walking down any street in St. John, even the grocery aisles. This was especially true when I was out with my mother, Holly. We would often be stopped to have a chat, and people would often turn to tell stories and share history of my grandfather or my Aunt Agnes. Because of this, every day was a lesson in local history for me. As I was school-aged, I continued enjoying learning about Canadian history, both formally in the classroom and out. I also learned that I was being taught Black history as Canadian history, but nobody else was. I was attending school and learning about Canada and some of the Canadians, but I knew that there was more to the history lessons than what was in the books. I knew that the curriculum that was being taught was that of colonialized teaching. They left out all of the history that wasn't theirs. By 4th grade, I was done wondering why, and I reached out via letter to the editor of my local newspaper to inquire why Black history that we were being taught was exclusively white. That was in 1994. By 1997, I was done waiting and tired to see if it would include history other than just that of the British. I decided to boycott my grade 7 social studies class. I would go on to create my own history lessons and spend time researching Black history beyond what I had already learned. What I was being taught was just the enslavement portion, not of local greats such as Willie O'Ree, who was NHL's first Black hockey player, or even of my grandfather, Joseph Drummond, who did a peaceful protest in St. John. I also wasn't taught of local Canadian heroes like Skip Talbot or Lena O'Ree. We didn't even touch on the Black Loyalists, which is surprising considering I went to school in St. John, which is a city that is rich in Loyalist history. The basic history that was being left out was Canadian history. It was being ignored and not included. The school that I attended made a point to teach Black history, but that's because I was there and somebody had donated some Black history books. When I finished and went off to high school, Black history left with me. I'm now raising, in 2022, a Black son, a son who will easily stand at 6 feet in the next couple of years. He is being taught as I was taught, and any questions he asks me are answered as in and only the way that a Black mother can answer them. It's been in the past years that the WABC has dwindled down and lost members. Just this year, daughters and granddaughters of founding members of the WABC banded together and decided to unite our community again. We just recently had our first event. We brought back the annual picnic and dance, and I like to think that it was a success. After we had the picnic and games, the rain didn't even stop us. We set up our tents, we had the barbecues going, and then later on that night, we held the dance, and I, again, like to think it was successful. It's because of my son that I quickly signed on to be part of the WABC. As visible minorities, I want him to grow up surrounded by strong Black role models, learning Canadian history regularly, not just what I'm teaching him. Ironically, we're gathered here today, August 1st, 2022, as New Brunswick finally formally recognizes Emancipation Day. Emancipation Day that in 1834, the Slavery Abolish Act went into effect. This is where my struggle lies. We are gathered here in celebration of giving back something that was taken from us unjustly. There was a foreword written by my grandfather in 1972 that was part of the book written by W.A. Spray, The Blacks in New Brunswick, and it speaks of how the Blacks here were taught that our history is nothing and that we are nothing, and that it's up to us to write our history and share it with the generations behind us. And to me, that's what Emancipation Day needs to be acknowledging and to be about. We need to share our history and ensure that it properly gets written down for the history books. Black history is Canadian history. Thank you.